Hello my friends, and welcome back to the second installment of Teaching from Home Spring 2020 in the Greystone Easement Studios. I am your host, Claymaster Gray. Today we're going to be talking about the Potter's Wheel. I'm sure you guys have seen these around. We have pretty much these exact same ones at Southwestern and at Miramar. And I'm going to teach you guys how to operate these machines and how they work and how to make some cool art on them. So just to jump into it, let's do an overall breakdown of what this machine is. Ultimately, underneath, mounted and kind of sealed up, is a big motor with a belt, and that belt spins this metal disc. This metal disc is called your wheel head. And it is the top here that we make our pottery or our sculptures or our throne forms, whatever you want to call them. Surrounding this spinning metal disc is a plastic guard called a splash pan. And this will keep you from getting too dirty, although it's a pretty messy job. And then how this operates, is down here is a little control panel box with an on and off switch and a forward and reverse switch. And then there's a foot operated pedal down here. Okay, kind of like driving a car. Bring it back up. There's also affixed on this wheel head is what we call the bat pins. They're two little bolts. I don't know if you guys can see them, that go through on each side of this wheel head. Those are to hold something called a bat in place. Bats come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Don't eat them. There are plastic ones. There are plaster ones. Southwestern has wooden ones. Most of the time they're circular. I have some square ones, and they have little holes in them that correspond with the bolts that are on your wheel head or your bat pins there. And it clicks on, it mounts on the top. And we're going to be forming or throwing on this plate rather than throwing right on the metal. You can throw on the metal. I'm going to show you that before the day's over. But that's just how I have mine set up today. Okay. Now, last episode, we went over wedging extensively, which, like I said, is absolutely mandatory. If you're going to be getting on the Potter's Wheel, you really have to learn how to wedge. You should be pretty fluent at wedging before we get on this machine, or at least learning at the same time. Okay, so I won't bore you again with wedging today, like I did for 40 minutes last week. I have some already wedged up. In fact, I even have some of the ones I wedged from last time. Okay, got a nice smooth round ball. And how this works is, to get prepped, I gotta make sure my splash pan is on securely. My bat is on there securely if I'm using one. I got some fresh clay. I have a bucket of water. I have a sponge. Potter sponge came in your toolkit. I have a wire cutter. You should all have these things, right? I have my metal and wooden rib, and I also have some rubber ribs. They make all sorts of different shapes and sizes and flexibilities of these rubber ribs. And I have my wooden potter's knife. And you guys know me, I have tons of tools, but those are the basics that I need today. Okay, so how this works. I'm all set up. I'm gonna make sure that my pedal is off, so when I turn this on, it doesn't start moving right away. So the pedal is decompressed. I'm gonna turn it on, and then I'm gonna make sure that it's in the forward position, which spins the wheel counterclockwise. That's really important. There's you got two options, clockwise or counterclockwise. I want you guys to spin counterclockwise. Unless you're really dominantly left-handed, then we'll reverse everything, but let's skip over that for now. Wheels on, set to counterclockwise. You can check it just to make sure by compressing that pedal a little bit. Got a nice ball of clay. For a beginner, it's really nice to start with between 1 and 2 pounds. Anything less than a pound, it's too small and intricate, and you have to be much more precise. Anything larger than 2 pounds, you have to be a little bit stronger. Maybe for bigger people with bigger hands, 2 pounds would be better, but this is probably about 1.5 pounds. Okay? I didn't weigh it. Right, so I've wedged it up, you know, between 30 and 70 times, depending on my clay body, and I've patted it into a nice, smooth, round ball. And now I want to throw it down with a little bit of force, right dead center. So I want to kind of look at the dead center of my wheel head or my bat, and I'm going to throw it down with a little bit of force, okay? So it kind of flattens and sticks. After I've thrown it down, before I turn the wheel on and before I add water, I'm going to be pressing and pushing this thing as close to center as possible. Because before we really get started on making a vessel, or any form, we have to make sure that this is perfectly centered. So the centering process for beginners is often the biggest hurdle. It's the most difficult in the beginning. It's the hardest thing to kind of get done just right, but absolutely important that you learn how to do that. So a lot of times for beginners, I have you guys practice centering for an entire day or an entire class time until you really get it down. And you might not get it after one day. It might take you a couple days. Some people get it right away. You know, it all depends. So I'm going to push and pat this to center. I haven't turned the wheel on yet. I'm just turning it by hand. And you can kind of do a little slap method too. Just repetitively hit it and slowly turn it. And try and get it as close to center as possible before we start turning the wheel on, before we start adding lots of water. Okay, so I've patted and pushed it as close to center as I can, and although it's not perfect, it's close enough for now. The next step is I need to seal this to the bat. I really want to make sure that this doesn't rip off or pull off or move at all. So I need to seal it down to the bat. And I do that by dipping my fingers in a little bit of water, and just use one finger at about a 45-degree angle and smear that clay onto the bat or the wheel head. Just need a little bit, okay? Not much, but now I'm pretty confident that it's not gonna slide anywhere. It's not gonna tear off really easily. It's stuck to the wheel, okay? So I've thrown it down, patted it to the center, and I sealed it to the bat. After that, I want to make sure my posture's right. I want to make sure my knees are almost at halfway up the wheel head, if not about 1/3 of the way up the wheel head. I want to make sure I'm sitting pretty close to it. I want to make sure that my knees are pretty squared off and that my pedal is almost directly under my knee. And I'm going to get going. So I'm going to use lots of water the whole time. I'm going to continuously be adding water to this piece the whole time. You're going to notice that even for me, subconsciously, I'm constantly dipping my hands in the water. Okay, so to get this perfectly centered, there's a method called coning and doming that we're going to use. And coning and doming method is also a method of more wedging on the wheel. It's processing the clay even further to get it prepared to be a vessel or a form, right? But most importantly, that we have to get this perfectly centered before we move on. So you can see right now, it's got a little bit of a bounce to it. Well, I don't want it to have any bounce. I want it to be a nice, perfectly centered dome, spinning flawlessly, right? And how I do that, it's called the coning and doming method. I'm going to hunker down. I'm going to keep my elbows planted in my knees or in my hips, in my thighs, and just on the left side and the right side. I'm going to lightly squeeze and slowly rise up, letting my thumbs meet at the top, and pull it up into a cone, right? Just kind of pull it up, squeeze it up into a cone. So that's the first step in coning and doming. The next step is doming. So pull up, my left hand stays on the left side, and my right hand comes from the front, like a little karate chop, a little judo chop. And together, they're gonna push down and away as this wheel is spinning, a nice moderate speed. The wheel speed is important. In the beginning, when you're centering, you can go medium to fast. Let's go over that one more time. I'm going to use both my palms. I'm using the lower edge of my pinky of my palm and up to the thumb meat is what I call it. On both hands, left and right. Plenty of water. Squeeze left and right. Slowly go up. Slowly release. and we're aiming for like parking cone proportions is what I call them. It's about the proportions of a parking cone, or if you were in elementary school, I would say a witch's hat. So up into a cone, left hand stays on the left side, right hand comes from the front. So another way to think about it too is my hands are coming up left and right, meet at the top, thumbs touch together, left hand stays, right hand, the pinky's gonna come and hook under my thumb, okay? And they're gonna push down and away. And it's much more of an away than down. If you can see by the angle of it, I'm pushing more that way than I am pushing flat, okay? So, even as a professional, you always want to cone and dome at least 3 times. But for beginners, I would say to cone and dome until you get it, right? Until it's centered, which may take a while. Plenty of water, up into a cone. Left hand stays on the left side. You can see the peak of that cone is nestled up right into my thumb here and into my palm right there. And my fingers are kind of wrapping around it. And then my right hand comes from the front. Pushes down and away. And together, they're just slowly letting this clay fall. If you ever feel like it's getting a little dry, slowly pause, add some water, go back down. Now, it's really important to slowly ease into pressure. Slowly ease into that pressure and slowly ease off. That slow release is probably one of the most important things, because I could be doing everything perfectly right, but if I quickly let go, it's off, right? So it could be perfectly still and I'm not hitting it at all. I'm just quickly letting go and it's off, okay? So slowly ease into it and slowly ease off of it, all right? Now I'm gonna do this a couple times, 2 or 3 times from different angles, hopefully, and hopefully it'll make more sense once you guys see it from a couple different views, and I'll go through the steps a few times. Okay. So once I think I've got it perfectly centered, one, it's just by looking at it, you can see that it's not bouncing it around. And also my hands are nice and still. When my hands are pressing on the surface of the clay here, and they're not bouncing around at all, I've gotten pretty close. Okay. So nice perfect dome. The coning and doming method, it's on your quiz. Once I feel like I got a nice perfect dome, what I'm going to do is I need to find the perfect center axis of this ball of clay. So I'm going to let my hands just ride around until I feel a little divot right in the center. Find that perfect little center spot. Make a little belly button, little bullseye. Okay. Again, I don't know if you can see. I think it's good to get my overall view, and then we'll get a couple more views dialed in a little bit better. Okay. All right. I've set the center axis point. So I have this perfect dome. I have a perfect little center hole here. And what I want to do is I want to extend this hole down until about 1/2 inch above the bat, or above the wheel head, okay? So that takes a little bit of practice to be able to gauge the depth by eye, but I'm going to show you a little trick where you can use a tool to figure out how thick your floor is, because you got to make a pot with a floor, otherwise it's not a pot. It's just a cylinder, it's a hollow cylinder, right? Or a tube. So what I'm going to do is just use 1 finger or 2. Some people do this with their thumbs as well, and I'll show you that way eventually as well. But what I'm going to do is the wheel's spinning at a nice moderate speed. My hands are wet, and I'm going to slowly push down into this clay. Now I don't want to go perfectly vertical. Otherwise, my finger's going to get suctioned down inside there. So I'm going to open this up by going straight down, but applying a little bit of pressure towards myself so that the hole is opening a little bit wider than my finger, okay? So straight down, but a little bit of pressure towards myself. Now, it's hard to gauge exactly what 1/2 inch is. So what you're going to do is you're going to stop the wheel, and you're going to get your needle tool. You should all know what a needle tool is by now. And I'm going to pierce it through the floor until it hits the bat or the wheel head. Right, so it's as far as down as it will go, and I'm going to run my finger alongside it until my finger touches the clay, and then I'm going to pull it out, and it's going to tell me exactly how thick my floor is. So that's about 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to go just a little bit further down, and then I'm ready to set my width. So right now I'm setting my depth a little bit further. Okay, that feels good. Now I want to set my width, and ultimately this is going to be like the width of your floor. The piece itself can eventually flare out, but I'm going to set the width of my floor right now. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take 1 or 2 fingers, and I'm going to hook them inside the clay, and I'm going to drag them straight back towards myself. And you'll see sometimes I'll use my left hand as like a track, as a guide. So although I'm only using these 2 fingers, I might use my left hand as like a track and a guide and like a support piece. You're going to notice that your hands are always going to need to work like codependently. Even though I'm only using my right hand or my left hand at any given time, they're always supporting each other. They're always pressing on each other. They're always locked in somehow. And it helps one hand inform the other and gives you a better like sense of depth perception and just 3-dimensional space in general if your hands come together. You know, it's really hard to define something out here, but as soon as I have kind of 2 points defining something, I have a little more control and I have a little more awareness of what's going on. All right, so I'm going to set my width. I'm going to take 2 fingers, make sure they're nice and wet, make sure the clay is wet, and I'm going to lightly pull them straight back towards myself. So I'm going all the way to the bottom. I'm not pressing any further down. I'm just pulling straight back towards myself, slowly initiating pressure, watching this thing expand. Once I get to my desired width, I'm going to slowly release. Well, what's my desired width? Today I'm just going to be throwing cylinders, about 6-inch tall cylinders that are about 3 or 4 inches wide. So the interior of my floor is going to be about 3 inches wide. Another important step, so I've coned and domed really well. I've found the center axis. I set my depth. I set my width. Now I need to compress my floor. And there's a couple ways you can do that. You can take your fingers and go back and forth on the inside of the floor, which I wish I could show you a better angle right now, but I will try and get a better angle before we're done. So I'm just pressing down on the floor and compressing it. One of the most common flaws in wheel-thrown pottery is you get a cracked floor. And the #1 cause to a cracked floor is lack of compression during these beginning steps. So it's kind of like the wedging, but not. It's just compacting those particles and compacting the floor to make sure it stays nice and strong. So I've just done it with my fingers by going back and forth on the inside of the pot. But you'll see sometimes I'll also use a rib. So I'll come in with the short end of my wooden rib, and always working at 3 o'clock. That's an important thing you're going to hear several times today, is if you look at the wheel, you're sitting at the wheel and you pretend it's a clock, as in 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I'm going to be doing a lot of my work at 3 o'clock on the right side, okay? I'm spinning counterclockwise, and I'm always typically working on the right side of the pot. Maybe we'll get into more why in a little bit. So compressing the floor, I can use my fingers. I'm going to use the short end of this rib at 3 o'clock. And I'm just going to lightly press it down inside the pot on a little bit of an angle to really flatten the floor and compress it. Okay? Just flattening, smoothing, compressing the floor. Beautiful. All right. So I've wedged, threw it down, patted the center, sealed it to the bat, coned and domed it, set my depth, set my width. Now I'm actually going to throw it. I'm going to pull it upwards. And I think after centering, this is probably the second hardest part. So what I'm going to be doing is, with the wheel spinning at a nice moderate speed, a nice medium speed, not too fast, not too slow, I'm going to be applying pressure with 2 fingers on the inside and 2 fingers on the outside at 3 o'clock So I'm kind of pinching and clawing in here, and I'm going to be raising it up. I'm going to be stretching this clay out. It's kind of just like making a pinch pot, except instead of turning it ourselves, the wheel is turning it. Instead of repetitive pinching, we're holding a constant pinch, and we're able to hold that constant pinch through water in this lubrication process. So it's think about it very similar to making a pinch pot, where we're just kind of squeezing and thinning out the clay so it expands. Okay. Now I learned pottery from a man in college, Stan Panetsky, God rest his soul. He taught me more about wheel throwing than anyways. He had like incredibly deformed hands. He had an arthritic degenerative disease. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me talking about it because he used to be open about it too. And he'd be like, I use this little claw thing over here, and I use this little nub over here, and I just, you know, I just put them together. Sounded like that too. But ultimately, there are some foundation rules that you can't break, where you have to work at 3 o'clock. And what I'm going to be doing is applying pressure inside and out. So sometimes you'll see I'll use like fingertips, and sometimes you'll see I'll use a knuckle. Sometimes you'll see people throwing with a sponge. Okay, but for right now, you'll see me using 1 or 2 fingers on the inside and like a knuckle or some fingers on the outside. Okay, but the key is 3 o'clock, and I'm going to slightly initiate pressure until I see and feel a reaction, and then I'm going to slowly let my hands spiral upwards until I've reached the top. Now, one little slow steady pull, you can see I've already started to transform this piece quite a bit. Alright, now you're never going to get it all in 1 or 2 pulls. It's going to take a few pulls, and it's, I think, good for beginners to be a little cautious at first. Take your time, you know, make sure it's done right. But also don't be afraid to make mistakes, right? No mistakes, just happy accidents. So I'm going to slowly initiate pressure, and I'm going to squeeze a little harder at the base, and I'm going to slowly alleviate that pressure as I go up. Now, the reason I squeeze a little bit harder at the base is because you have a lot more resistance down here. You have the floor of your clay, you have the bat or the wheel head itself all pushing back at you. Where up here, the rim is free in space and it can wiggle around pretty easily. Down here is pretty truncated and pretty solid. So, when I'm throwing, in the beginning, I have to apply a little more pressure at the base. That's where all your clay wants to hide. And I'm going to slowly let these spiral upwards. And hit the top and slowly release. Okay? And you can see I'm well on my way to a good cylinder right now, but I still have a substantial amount of clay and thickness left at the bottom of my walls. So I'm going to continue to pull that, and I'm going to squeeze a little bit harder at the base and slowly alleviate that pressure as I go up. Nice moderate speed, keeping a consistent speed. Although you will see sometimes I kind of slow down in between takes. Right? And, you know, it's typically equal pressure. But you also want to look at your form and look where the clay is and look where you want it to go. If I want the piece to go out a little bit further, I'll press a little bit harder with my inner hand. If I want the piece to go in a little further, I'll press a little harder with my outer hand. Right? So, one more nice little squeeze out the bottom here. Slowly take this piece upwards. Okay. Another really important tip is you should never leave standing water inside your piece. There should never be like a puddle of water in the bottom. So if there is, take a little sponge and mop it out. Now, I want you guys to practice throwing cylinders as beginners. Obviously, we're not going to do it at home unless you do have a wheel. It'd be awesome if you did. But I want you to practice throwing cylinders, because cylinders, they're a lot harder to throw than like a bowl, I think, in my opinion. But it's a technical exercise. It's a technical practice that if you can throw a good cylinder, everything else will come way easier. Okay. Now you'll see sometimes I'll use a rib too, especially if I'm throwing a cylinder. I'll use a rib, and I'll use the rib on the exterior, and I'll push my clay up against this rib to kind of give it a smoother, flatter wall. Okay. Now you can see my right hand is still always anchored in my leg, like it's always anchored in my knee or in my hip. But eventually my left hand is going to have to come up because I can't reach down at the bottom of it. Okay. And you'll see I like to touch it up with a sponge sometimes. I'll use the sponge to kind of smooth it out and just play with it a little bit and maybe alter it a little bit. You'll see the sponge is good for painting water on the surface of the piece to make sure that your whole piece has a nice coat of water on it before you do your poles. Okay, cool. And then when you get to the end, what I like to do is just take my wooden potter's knife and create a little bit of an undercut, create a little bit of a bevel. So I'm just taking the sharp part of my tool, coming in at like a 45-degree angle, and cleaning up that bottom a little bit. And it's also good to scrape all the clay off your bat while it's still on the wheel too. Okay, now I didn't do a supreme job at this, but let's look and see how I did. So, let me rinse my hands really quick. Set for you guys. So, this wasn't my best work, but it's all right. What you're looking for is relatively even wall thickness. And you can see I left it a little bit thicker on the bottom than it is on the walls. Because what we're going to be doing later on, probably next week, is we're going to be trimming a foot. And what that means is there's going to be a recessed area underneath where there's kind of a gap so that you can glaze the bottom, right? So it's standing on a little foot on the edge, and the bottom is recessed so we can glaze down there. You know, some of you put little feet on your pinch pots or coil pots. We started talking about it too. I think most of you get the gist, but it'll make more sense when I actually do the trimming demo. So let's scrap this little guy, and I'm gonna run through the steps one more time. Let's see if I forgot anything, because there are a lot of steps. So let me move a little bit faster through this. And let's try and get you guys a little bit better of a view. Let me see here. No, I'm gonna bring you down onto the wheel. I got a nice little tripod. I didn't want to get it too dirty, but who cares? Let's bring you down to this level and get you a little closer. Okay. Hello. Okay. How's that? So this is going to be opposite, right? So you guys are seeing this is my left hand, this is my right hand. But that's cool. Get you a little better view for this time around. Okay, so the wheel is spinning counterclockwise. If I'm using a bat, it's on there securely. I always start with like a clean, dry slate. If I throw clay down on a wet bat or a wet wheel head, it won't stick. So it's got to be pretty clean and dry. Okay, let's move on. So I'm going to throw some of this stuff, so this was the one that we wedged till it was completely homogeneous. Remember in my first video, I left some of them marbled, which will be fun. But this is the one I wedged where it was mostly homogeneous. So this was a mixture of the Black Mountain clay and the B-Mix, and it was blended all together really well. Okay, so set it in the middle, throw it down with a little bit of force. Flattens it out, sticks it down. We're gonna pat and push this thing as close to center as we can. So my wheel's not on yet. I'm not adding water yet. I'm just patting and pushing. You know, once I start turning the wheel on and adding water, I'm adding so many more variables, and I'm adding a bit more chaos to this whole equation, right? Where right now I'm just kind of in analog mode and making sure I can get it as centered as I can before I start spinning the wheel and before I start adding water, okay? Again, centering is the hardest part. So if the earlier on we set ourselves up for success, the better, right? Got to stay well prepared. All right, so threw it down, patted it into center. Who knows the next step? Seal it to the bat. Yes, that's the answer. I'll seal it to the bat. Just one finger, a little bit of water. You guys are probably getting some gnarly vibrations. Sorry. This wheel is not the greatest, but it works. Okay. Add plenty of water. I'm going to squeeze left and right with my palms. Let those thumbs come together in the middle. You can just make a little dome in the beginning, or a little cone, I'm sorry. Come back up again. Make a little cone. Thumbs came together at the top. Nice little A-frame fashion. My left hand stays on the top, and my right hand comes from the front, and they're going to push down and away. Okay. Now you'll notice some twists on your first couple. Those are totally normal. That's why we always cone and dome at least 3 times. Again, as a beginner, you could do this all day until you get it right, but as once you get it down, you should still always cone and dome 3 times. Up. So it came up. The left hand stayed at the top. Right hand is a nice way to think about it. Is my pinky's going to lock underneath my thumb there. I'm going to push down and away. And it's much more away than down. Okay. One more time. Slowly initiate pressure. Squeeze. Nice moderate to fast speed. To a cone, slow release, get some water, left hand on the left side, right hand in the front, down and away. Now my right hand's doing the bulk of the work, right? My palm and a little bit of my pinky are getting most of that. My left hand is just catching that bottom edge there, okay? So I don't know, sometimes I break this down into geometry for people, because I'm a little more math-brained, is I'll break it down into planes of force, where I have a bulk of my force is coming in from that direction with my right hand. A little bit of force is coming with my thumb and pinky at the top, and then a little bit of force is coming in down here from my left hand, right here. But you can see the bulk of it is that diagonal from the front. Let's go one more time for good luck. Squeeze left and right. Nice and slow and steady. My wheel's spinning fast, but my hands are moving slow. Okay? Push down and away. My elbows are always in my knees. It's super important that your elbows are in your knees. Make it into a nice little bubble. Once you get it centered, try and get it as a nice smooth little bubble. Compact it, round it off. Make sure it's nice and clean. It's not bouncing at all. It looks nice and machined into center. Okay, good practice. Alright, next step, I'm going to find that center axis point. I can let my finger roll around, roll around, roll around, then like boom, you feel it settle right in the center. Okay, make a little belly button. Next, I'm going to set my depth So I'm going to come in with just one finger for now. I could use my pointer. You'll see sometimes I use my middle finger. And we'll go straight down. And I want to stop about a ½ an inch above the bat. But what's a ½ an inch? How do we gauge that? We're going to stop the wheel. We're going to grab our needle tool. We're going to pierce the needle tool through the floor until it hits the plastic. I'm going to run my finger alongside that needle tool. I'm going to pull it out, and it's going to tell me my depth, right? It's pretty good. A little less than a ½ an inch, but that's okay. Set my depth. Now I'm going to set my width. So I'm going to take one finger. This time I'm going to take my middle finger, and I'm going to drag it straight back towards myself. But I'm going to be using that left hand as a guide. Like I said, they're always supporting each other. Support system here. Use the buddy group. The buddy method. I'm going to pull it straight back towards myself. And I'm going to slowly initiate pressure. If I feel like it's getting dry, I want to slowly let go. Grab a little bit of water. And slowly resume my expansion. And then slow release. That slow release is so important. Now you guys have a little better view now. When I was compacting it the first time, I was just using these two fingers and going back and forth from the center off to the right. Center off to the right. It's always important you're working at 3 o'clock. Probably one of the most important little bits of information is that we're always working at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to the center and off to 3 o'clock. Center, off to 3 o'clock. Now, I can also, like I said, use my wooden rib, which I like to do as long as the piece is big enough for this to fit inside. I'm going to use the short end of my rib. I'm going to come down at 3 o'clock at a little bit of an angle and just compress that clay down nice and flat. Okay? So I'm making a cylinder, so I want a nice flat floor. Beautiful, right? Alright, so I've set my depth, I've set my width, I've compacted my floor. Now, throwing up, right? So I'm going to apply pressure inside and out. You'll see sometimes I use my knuckles, like this in the beginning. You'll see a lot of times I'll use my fingertips. It kind of just depends on what I'm feeling and how big the piece is and what I'm trying to make. So normally my first pull at 3 o'clock is equal pressure inside and out, a light squeeze, and slowly start dialing it upwards once I see and feel a reaction to the clay, right? Try that again. Now I might apply a little bit more pressure with my outer hand just because I see more clay out there. And slowly go up, alleviating that pressure as I go up, hitting the rim, kind of pausing for a second, slowly release, okay? You'll see a lot of times too, I like to clean up the rim a lot as I go. Okay. Once the piece gets bigger, you can use your sponge to paint water on the surface to make sure that you have water all over it so you're not shoveling handfuls of water. Okay, make sure your hands are wet. Lightly squeeze at the base until you see and feel a reaction. Start going up. Alleviate that pressure as you go up. Go all the way through. Go all the way to the rim. Pause right at the rim. Slow release. Slow release is so important. Okay? One more little pull out of this guy. Kind of all fingertips at this point. Now I'm at like 3 to 4, 5 o'clock even, but I'm always... Okay. Alright, let's keep this one simple. So when I get to the end, what I want to do is sponge the water out of the inside. You don't want to leave any standing water in your pot, okay? You can smooth up your rim. You can make sure there's no slip or slop anywhere. If you want to leave that throwing texture on there, you can. Those finger marks. If you want to use a rib to smooth them out on the wheel, you can. I'm going to leave them this time. Maybe I'll just lightly sponge them. Okay? Now I want to clean up all this nonsense down here before I take it off. For a lot of reasons. There's always going to be a tiny bit of extra clay down here. It's kind of it's inevitable, right? You're always going to have a little bit of extra clay right here. So the best, what I like to do is just actually get my wooden rib and use the corner of that wooden rib down here and just scrape that a little bit, right? And then I can use the tip of my wooden rib to give it a little bit of a bevel. And that's so we can get it on and off easily without creating a mess, so it doesn't have a really sharp foot, but it's also prepping it for the next step, which is going to be trimming, which we'll talk about probably next week, okay? So let's keep this one nice and simple and short and sweet for now. You know, if I was in full production mode and I was done with this piece, I might trim it later, but I might add a little bit of water and take my wire cutter nice and tight in my fingers, like that, wire cutter, and just run a pass through it. And now I'm just gonna leave it on there. I'm gonna leave it on the bat, but I cut it off, okay? And it'll probably be smart to clean this up a little bit too, okay? And we'll set this one aside, okay? So I'm gonna rinse my hands and I'm gonna try another angle. Hold on 1 second. I think seeing this from different angles will be pretty beneficial. Sorry guys, I'm still here. 1 second. Alright. Got a new bat. Okay, I've never done this before ever, but I'm gonna ghost the tripod. I'm gonna put you guys in my seat. Alright. So I'm gonna be working around. This is gonna be difficult, but we'll try and make it quick. Is that good? I got a good angle? Yeah, I guess so. Bear with me. Okay, let's try one of these marbled pieces of clay. So this is one of the ones that I wedged the two clays together kind of crudely. Throw it down with a little bit of force. Okay? Pat it and push it to center. So again, you guys are in my seat and I'm working over top of the camera. I'm ghosting you right now. I'm a real Patrick Swayze. Okay. Alright, we've patted it as close to center as we can. Alright, before we start really spinning and adding water. Okay. Next step is sealing it to the bat. Just use a little bit of water, like one finger, seal it to the bat. Okay, smears it on down, gets nice and stuck. Next, plenty of water and coning and doming. So squeeze left and right. Thumbs come together at the top. Slowly release. Let me get a little bit of more water. I'm going to do that a little bit one more time. And then my left hand stays there. And my right hand comes from the front, right? Beep. And I'm just pushing down and away. Back up. Left hand on the left side, right hand on the front, down and away. Okay. Up into a nice tall cone. Back down into a dome. Now, this clay is a little funky because it wasn't wedged and there's two different densities in there, but I'll manage standing up in this super awkward position. I hope it's helpful. Okay, You're gonna make a little belly button at the top, right? You wanna find that center axis. We're just gonna go up. You find that little soft spot there. And then we're gonna set our depth. We're gonna go straight down. We're gonna apply a little bit of pressure towards ourselves. So this is opening up a little bit wider than my finger. And then we're gonna stop about a ½ inch or so above the bat. And to check that, we're gonna stop the wheel. We're gonna get our needle tool. We're gonna pierce it through the floor. We're gonna run our finger down alongside it, pull it out, and it's gonna tell us how thick we are. Okay? Looks okay. I've set my depth. Now I'm gonna set my width. I'm gonna take 2 fingers, I'm gonna rake them in there, I'm gonna hook it on the inside, and I'm gonna pull straight back towards us, straight back towards ourselves. Okay? Slowly initiate pressure. Slowly ride it out to your desired width. This one's going to be a little bit wider because it's a bigger piece. Slowly release. Okay. Now we're at 3 o'clock this time. So before I was using 2 fingers on the inside, just going back and forth and kind of smoothing it out and compressing the floor. But also I was, again, my favorite is just use the short edge of this rib at 3 o'clock. Okay. Nice flat floor. Now we're gonna pull the walls up. We're gonna apply equal pressure inside and out. You can do it with 2 fingers like this. You'll see sometimes I do it with like a knuckle in the side of my fingers, but they're always working together, and you're gonna see they're always like bracing each other. So like they're always gonna be touching each other somehow and supporting each other. Now we're gonna lightly squeeze the sides until we see and feel a reaction. And we're going to slowly raise this upwards. Okay. Get it nice and wet inside and out, plenty of water. Squeeze at 3 o'clock. Slowly dial it up. Now I am standing up, hunched over a tripod, throwing with blended clays that aren't blended all the way. It was a little difficult, but I'm doing okay. Okay. When it gets a little thinner, you'll notice I use like more fingertips. Really dig in there too, because this sandy clay needs a little bit more aggression, I think. Use a sponge, lightly squeeze, slowly raise up the sides, alleviating pressure as I go up. Going to the top, slowly releasing pressure. Okay. This is really awkward and difficult, but it's alright. Hopefully it's worth it for you guys. If you're ever feeling like it's flaring out too much, or you're trying to throw a cylinder, and you can see on this one it's starting to flare out, there's a little technique called collaring. I usually don't show this right in the beginning, but what you can do is kind of choke the piece. You can triangulate your hands around it, starting from the base, and slowly just kind of choke it back into place. Slowly, it's called collaring. Collar it back in. Okay, now we're a little straighter. And again, like the first time I showed you, I was throwing up against the rib sometimes, so if you want, you can try and put a rib on the outside and just use your fingers on the inside and press the clay up against it if you want a nice straight-walled cylinder. Sometimes it's helpful for people to use a tool rather than their fingers. Now, you can't use the tool the whole time, but it definitely helped smooth it all out. Okay. Now, I'm not going to do too much with this one either, because I'm just in such an awkward position. Okay. So I guess one more thing I'll show you. Again, I usually don't show this until like the second or third day of throwing. But you can see with this one, I have a slightly uneven rim. And the reason for that is, well, there's probably a lot of reasons, but mostly because the clay is really uneven and there's 2 different densities twisted together. But if you have an uneven rim, what you can do is you're going to take your needle tool and you're going to slowly hold it very, very steady in one place
and slowly let it fall through the rim of the pot until it hits your finger. Once it hits your finger, boop, pop it off. And now I've trimmed the top of my pot level again. Yay! Okay, maybe I'll soften it up with a little bit of sponge. And this one I'm going to leave as is. Now, it might not look like it's marbled or blended clay, but once I trim through that surface, that layer of mud on the skin, you'll see the definition of the marbling a lot better. So the marbling will rear its head during the trimming process, which is later on. I'll explain later. Okay, we just add some design in this one for fun. I give the rim a little pinch, right? Give it a little decor. I think I'm going to make this one a flower pot for my home here. Cool. All right. Let me rinse my hands one more time. Oh, that killed my back. I'll have to figure out a better way to get that angle if it worked for you guys. Oi. Okay. So, yeah, intro to throwing. It's a pretty innocent machine overall, but it can be pretty dangerous. So I do want you guys to kind of rewatch the beginning of this video and remember all those little safety things I said about making sure the wheel's kind of off before you sit down, and not turning the wheel on when if your splash pan isn't secure. You don't want to leave clay or tools or a bucket of water when you go to sit down, because if you accidentally turn the wheel on and things can go flying. It's nothing too crazy, but sorry, let me clean this up. I'm gonna go one more, and I'm gonna try not to talk. Oh, bear with me. Pop this off. Set aside. And we got some more marbled clay. Grab another bat. Maybe next video I'll show you guys how to throw without the bat pins. Next time. Okay. So nice smooth round ball. Throw it down with some force. All right, and I'm just gonna roll through this kind of my full speed. Normally this is when I would check the thickness of my floor, but skip it up. Also, I start fast and I slow down as the piece gets bigger. So I center fast and I do my first kind of couple of movements fast, and then I slow it down. I slow the wheel speed down as the piece gets bigger.
marbling a little bit better, but you'll see it a lot better once I trim it. Okay, when I get to the end, clean out all the water and slip out of the inside. Clean off your bat, and then give it a little bit of an undercut. Okay, just with the tip of your rib or your wooden knife. Just a little bit. And that's it. So again, today I was just making cylinders, because if we were in the studio, I'd be forcing everybody to make cylinders for like a couple days. And then next week, we'll go into trimming these, which ultimately is what's going to happen is once these are leather hard, they're going to get mounted back on the potter's wheel upside down, so we can tool the bottoms, and so we can add design elements and functional aspects and things to the bottom of the foot, create a lifted foot. But yeah, other than that, so cleanup, I'm gonna go over cleanup because some of y'all don't clean up. Yeah, one of my pet peeves is when people don't clean their wheels and all that. Cleaning up, what I like to do is I'll take my piece off carefully first and go set it aside somewhere safe. And then I'll wipe most of the slip off the wheel into the splash pan. And then what I like to do is I'll take all my tools, I'm going to put them into my throwing bucket. So I'm going to gather all my stuff, and I'm just going to throw that in there for now. I'm going to pop this little splash pan off the front first by pressing down on these two tabs. And I'm going to dump the bulk of my slip and my slop and my clay and all that debris out of there, and I'm going to push that down into the bucket. Okay, I'll do this with both. So take this one off carefully. Same idea. Just kind of scrape the bulk of the clay and the slip and the slop down into your throwing bucket. Okay. Cool, cool. And then I'm going to take this to the quote-unquote sink, and I'm going to wash all my tools individually and make sure I get all my tools out of here and cleaned. And then I'm going to dump this into my slop containers or my recycling bins, making sure that I don't leave any tools in there. Then I'm going to take these to the sink and I'm going to scrub these out really well. My sink, actually, for you more professionals out there, here, you'll love this. This is my favorite. Oh, I just keep a big 5-gallon bucket with the car washing mitt in it. This thing is wonderful. This car washing mitt, you just come in and just really mops everything up pretty quick, right? You just rinse it in the bucket and let the clay settle. So obviously cleanliness is extremely important to me in a ceramic studio. You know, it's just really a health and safety issue, but it becomes a chore for everybody else in the studio if we have to constantly work around your mess. So please, if and when we do get back, be mindful of the cleanliness. I'm not super clean here because I'm outside and it's my house and I'm the only one that's using this, and I'm going to be using the same clay bodies mostly. So I'll just be lightly rinsing this stuff off. So, but at the schools, you should be scrubbing these clean. Okay? At Southwestern, they don't get put back on the wheel. They stay on a shelving unit. At Miramar, we put them back on the wheel, the splash pans. I also want you to get your big sponge. After you clean all your tools and stuff too, you're going to come in and make sure that the wheel head is clean. You're going to clean the edges of the wheel head. You're going to clean this whole counter space, this tabletop, the wheel top here. Clean it all up. You know, if you have to go rinse your sponge a couple times, don't be lazy, please. Clean it all up. You can clean the sides. If you spilled on the floor at school, if there's any clay on the floor, I either want you to get a sponge and hand mop it up, or go get a mop. Go get a real mop. At Miramar, I've been busting out the mop like every class. But just clean up the floor around your wheel. Pretend like it's your own home. Pretend like you're going to have to walk through there for the rest of the day. So please clean up really well when you're done. Again, in my case, my splash pans are just going to go back on. And then I might do like one more once over. Okay. So not too bad. It just takes a couple minutes, but you have to do it. All right, we're going over an hour. There's never enough time in the day, so I'm gonna keep making videos. Please, if you have any questions, this is a lot of information. If you have any questions, just throw them out there. I really don't mind. I have nothing else to do. It might take me a couple days to respond sometimes, but just hit me up. If not, I'm gonna continue these videos, but we're gonna do some better forms. We're gonna do bowls and cups and plates, and we'll do some handled stuff. And then if any of my advanced students out there are watching and want some more sophisticated stuff, we'll just keep running through it. We'll do maybe some bottles and vases and stemware. I love stemware, so yeah. Recap things that will be on your quiz. All the parts, like what is the splash pan, what is the wheel head, what are bat pins, what are bats, what are all your tools, what is a rib, what is a wooden knife, you know, what is a wire cutter, what is it used for, you know, we should be spinning counterclockwise, you know, the coning and doming method, how thick you should leave your floor, 1/2 inch, and yeah, maybe a couple other random questions, but take the time, maybe watch the video more than once. I don't know. What else do you got to do, eh? I don't know, some of you are still working, but... Okay, well, miss you guys. Wish I was there. Thanks for people that have been subscribing to me on YouTube now. Thanks for the likes. Thanks for submitting your work on time. Email me if you have any doubts or any questions about anything, but... ultimately, as long as I know you guys are watching these videos in their entirety, which YouTube Studio shows me how long people are watching my videos for, just so you know, and take the quiz and do a good job and you're not cheating and stealing the answers from somebody else, I'll be pretty happy. Okay, we'll keep it pretty simple. There'll be a couple more writing assignments and some other things before the end of the semester, but as long as I know you're all watching and taking the quizzes on time, I'll be pretty content, I think. Again, I want to teach you guys as much as I can. I don't want to deprive you of this wonderful education that you've worked so hard for and put so much time and effort and money into. I don't want to deprive you of anything, but at the same time, the world is crazy right now, and I get it, and we all are just kind of stressed or whatever, but don't be. Do art, you know, get off your phones. Don't read what social media has to tell you. Anyways, love you guys. Bye.